Hey everybody, your favorite professor here. Today we're gonna finish up death and dying. Specifically, we're gonna get into the experiences at the end of life and what are the factors that make for a good death or a good dying process. By the end of this lecture, hope you are more informed so you and your loved ones can make better decisions about the dying process. Wanted to give a shout out to Cobra Kai. I hope everybody's watching that Netflix series because it is fire. So shout out to, I guess, Ralph Macchio and William Zabka.
Instead of a body bag!
Today we're gonna overview and finish up what we talked about during the live session. We're gonna talk more about the influences and these experiences, specifically how they relate to the societal influences and the intrapersonal influences. Intra means within the self, right? This is within. Influences involved in this end of life. And we're gonna get into some of that terminology and just those experiences at the end of life and how do we make that the best possible experiences? What are the factors that predict that? And we know there's some universal experiences such as the bright light out there or the seeing your life flash before your eyes. So we will get a little more into that. Then we are going to recap. So as we said before, that most people, especially in developed nations, make it into these older ages. And an unprecedented amount, you guys are clearly
not hearing that word enough during these unprecedented times, but
there's just so many older adults out there because they are making it to old adulthood. And we don't know what to do with them, you know? This is just so many people at this age bracket that we don't know what to deal with. And we're having to deal with nowadays these chronic ages, these chronic diseases that kill people not quickly but slowly. And with the advent of modern medicine, dang, that's a lot. So because there's the advent of modern medicine and these vaccines that are given to us, we're less likely to die earlier in life, you know? So these early in life, right, we pump our health up, right? That means we're able to make it into old age. You know, these medicines such as like vaccines or just even public health wise, washing hands, you know, hygienes, toilets everywhere. These, especially in the developing world, promote more people to make it to old age, right? 2/3 in the US actually make it to older ages. Older age meaning 65. 65 because the government, 65 because the government says that this is when you are able to qualify for retirement.
Slide to the left.
So what kills us is these chronic diseases, especially as we make it into old age. And we see here, heart disease is the #1 killer, second by cancer, right? This is what these malign neoplasms are, right? These cancers. And you see here, most of these are chronic, right? Except this injury, and I'll leave a link about what are the types of injuries that people die from, but all of these are chronic. You know, and you can see earlier in their lifespans, usually through people die through these accidents, essentially, except when you get into later ages. And as we make it into these later ages, right, and dying a slower death, there becomes a lot of issues that occur, especially when they involve the dying process. And this dying process is really different even within the United States. You know, how you could die in California and Oregon is different than maybe Nebraska, Kentucky. Their states have these different policies and restrictions of what you can or cannot do toward the end of life. And to go even a bigger route, Europe, right? Europe is going to be different than the United States as well. This is why we see such a large influx of people doing this tourism, right? Euthanasia tourism, because they go to another place to die, right? Because those other places have more choices that are more aligned with how they want to die. And we got a little into that with the Brittany Maynard case. She went from California to Oregon, because back then, right, they had more choices in dying compared to California, and we know those have recently changed. So when we talk about this experience at the end of life, right, we think about intrapersonal, right, how the person feels. So think about, this is your life, right? This is the life that you lived, right? This is the life lived. And toward the end of life, right, you see that the end is near, right? This end, right, I'm just putting the light of the tunnel is near. So there is this shortened time horizon. So this shortened time horizon, right, leads to a lot of these changes, psychologically. A lot of these changes have been highlighted and shown in research to be changes in needs, psychological needs, from knowledge needs, wanting to learn and experience things, to more emotional needs. What are things that provide you with happiness? What is the best chance to gain experiences that provide you happiness, right? This is all part of social emotional selectivity theory, meaning because you have a shortened time horizon, you start to focus on these emotional needs more, over the lifespan. And this is all Laura Carstensen's work, in which she hypothesized of this and found not only in older adults, but has also shown this phenomenon to occur in people with these shortened time horizons, such as AIDS patients back then, and people with terminal illnesses. And so seeing that there's a shortened time horizon really gets us psychologically, intrapersonally different, right? Focusing on different needs and wants. And this is why we see in older adults and dying individuals that social circles, right, they start to get smaller. You don't want to just hang out and go out clubbing. What's the cool club that everybody goes to here? Broadway bar, or I don't know, whatever LA bar, Mobu or something like that in Malibu. But essentially, you don't want to do that when you get older, right? Because it's a crapshoot out there. You're like, oh, you're gonna have a fun time or not. When you get older, it's more about like, oh, hey, like bling, bling, bling. Oh, you want to hang out? Maybe your BFFL, right? Your best friend for life. Or your kids or your grandkids that provide you joy. So this is why we see when people get older, their social circles start to shrink, right? They start focusing more on quality over quantity, because to meet these emotional needs, they know who makes them happy, right? They know who provides them joy in life. So for you guys with the lecture quiz, I want you guys to discuss a time when you had a shortened time horizon, this social emotional selectivity. You don't have to have a near-death experience, but it could be that, or it could be you're graduating high school, or you're nearing your time here at CSUN. So in the discussion, please put a time when your time horizon was shrinking, but then also put how social emotional selectivity may have played into that, how you acted maybe differently because of that. Talked a lot about ego integrity and putting your pieces together. Let's talk a little bit about ego despair. And this ego despair really got highlighted, and I think Bonnie Ware did a really great job at it She is a healthcare worker that has worked with palliative care individuals, right? People who are in their dying part of their life. You know, they just want to improve quality of life. She highlighted the top 5 regrets of the dying. And these top 5 regrets are also really supported by the research on regret and rumination. As an example of this, let's use William Zabka of The Karate Kid for this. So let's just say William Zabka, right? So he didn't want to make it work with Ali because he was peer pressured. He wanted to look super tough, you know, tough for his friends, right? He wanted to be tough, and for the Cobra Kai, of course. And he didn't make it work. So there's inaction, right? He didn't act and didn't want to make it work because of inaction and these external forces from the Cobra Kai. And he regrets this all the time, you know? And when you start to regret things of inaction, you start to really second guess yourself and think of the counterfactuals, you know? What if with Ali, right? Let's just say, what if with Ali that you would have had 2 kids and then a dog named Piffy, right? Random Piffy, right? And you go down this rabbit hole of counterfactuals. There's all these open realities that could happen because of inaction. And especially if those inactions are due to like peer pressure or don't want to look stupid, right? So this is really focused on these external forces, right? Even though you wanted to do something that you knew would have been make you happy, you let these external forces really get in the way. So that's an example of these inaction regrets, but then also a prime example of this number 1 regret of the dying. But let's just say action. If he would have just acted, right? And then she said, "Hell no." Then he would have potentially regretted less because it would have stung less. The sting would have been less because he tried at that time, you know, of something. It doesn't really go into these alternate realities as inaction, you know, like, oh, I should have done this. Oh, I should have done that. I should have done that. Or, oh, I wish I would have done that. These are these inaction regrets. So I guess there is kind of something to say because of the YOLO part of this really hits along with that. So this is a good highlight of these external forces, right? External forces driving external forces, right? Driving your behavior that you didn't want to do. And the second one is more about working so hard. So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and in general trends throughout the world, we're working longer hours. And we actually spend most of the waking day doing work or work-related activities. So these work-related activities really relate to working too hard, right? And we know that people matter, right? Other people matter. That's like one of the universal truths that we have found in positive psychology. And this regret of working too hard really relates to other people. You know, you work so hard and you missed out, right? And this missing out really has to do with opportunity cost. You know, you spent all this time working and doing something, you could have been doing something else. But, you know, society really puts a lot of this pressure, right? A lot of this external pressure, especially in your early career to work hard, you know, push it to the limit. And this is when we see a lot of burnout, but then we also see a lot of these long hours being worked. And it has to do with opportunity costs that occur with working too hard. And the third one, whoa, it's getting very messy in here, but the third one really involves internal, right? So I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. That's a little different than the first one because this courage, right? This courage really involves this internal strength that you wish you had at the time. And this is very intrapersonal. And it may or may not due to these external forces, but this right? This courage, this feeling, I wish you did something, right? This really also relates to these action, right? The ability to take action into something, and these emotions really have to relate to expressing your feelings, how I wish I would have told this person this, or I wish I'd have told this person that. So for example, let's give a Karate Kid example again. William wish he would have told Allie, right, how he really feels about her. You were the one, Allie. And you wish you would have just expressed that to her, just leave it all out on the table, right? All out on the table. But due to maybe many things, it could be external circumstances, or it could just be the time of your developments, or you would been overcome by fear, right? This is when the courage piece comes in, that you would have just expressed that to that person, and maybe a better outcome would have happened, or a different outcome would have happened. So we see this really tie into this ego despair piece. And another thing relating to people is friends. I wish I would have stayed in touch with my friends. And you see here, one of the first things that goes, especially when you go through life, it's your friend circle start to get smaller, but then you start to also focus on your career, you start to focus on your family, and you start to focus on your children, if you have that, children. And these really impede these friendships many of the times, and life goes really quickly. And it could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then all of a sudden you're like, dang, I haven't talked to that person in X amount of years, or haven't seen this person in 10 years. This might be a little different now with Facebook, but it's still, this may or may not be more different because of social media these days. We see people on their feed, but is that the same as keeping in touch with them? This is when you see people are like, oh wow, I wish I would have kept in touch with them. We used to be such good buddies. I wonder what happened. Or my life would have been different, if I would have just kept my friendships and I didn't let potentially our feelings get in the way of something, So another Karate Kid example would be William Zabka, right? Keeping in touch with Tommy, the guy who says, put him in a body bag, right? You wish you would have, because time happens, time passes so quickly that gets by the wayside, friends get put by the wayside. So that's that one regret there, right? That has to do with friendship. And the last regret has to really deal with wishing you had let yourself be happier. Meaning, this has to deal with a lot of all of these. They tie in together, but this regret of letting you be happier, you might know what makes you happy, what brings you joy, but it could be external forces, it could be the timing, it could be many things that influence that, but you just wish, because you see that this is the end, you start to see the bigger picture. What is the meaning of life? What provides significance to your life? And you wish you would have seen that earlier in your life. So another Karate Kid example of this is William Zabka really focusing on, wow, I wish I would have been there for my son. I forgot, the guy that looks like Sean from Boy Meets World, I forgot his name, but that kid, right? That's his son, and he wish he would have known back then that being there for his son earlier on would have made him happier, right? Because that's what really matters, right? His child, right? His kid being there. And he would have figured that bigger picture out earlier. Hopefully that made sense. These are the top 5 regrets of the dying, and you could see how all of them relate to each other, but you could see if people engage in any of these, they will develop this degree of ego despair, right? So getting into more of the fears of older adults, right? I'm talking about in the current circumstances, the top two are this loneliness, right? This loneliness is more subjective, right? Feeling alone, right? That nobody cares, and this isolation is this objective. So breaking those down a little bit. So loneliness is this subjective experience, and just think about, you could be alone and be fine with it. You have your own space. Or you could be around other people and just be on your phone. Everybody's on their phone. You see that all the time, boo, 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 boo. And you might feel alone even though there's people around you. So that's a subjective experience, right? Do you feel like you're by yourself? And is that more uncomfortable? And then social isolation, usually you see this more with rural or people with lower resources, social economic status, that they don't have the means to access resources or people with each other, right? And being able to access people that they care about, right? Their support system. So that's that social isolation piece, right? Social isolation is more objective as opposed to loneliness. This is more subjective. Next one is losing functionality. And losing function, especially physically and mental, really prey upon autonomy and independence, right? Not being able to do things for yourself, and that relates to, oh wait, I can't be my own person anymore. My life is not dictated in the direction I want to take. It's dictated by somebody else. And this relates to health as well, right? These are all interrelated to each other. But these are all about functioning, right? Being able to function and function under your own accord, right? Own accord. Because that's a detriment to our basic human need to be autonomous, right? Being able to self-direct and self-determine what we want to be doing and to engage in activities that we value. It's all about being a burden. So being a burden means that not only you living is a detriment to another person's life. That's the feeling that you get, right? When you are burdened to something, because of you, there is some type of hardship. And you don't want that, for the people you love. You don't want to see them suffering because of you. So that's the other piece of this burden piece, right? This psychological piece of being able to, and this is a big psychological piece, not wanting to weigh somebody down or weigh somebody's family down, right? Because then it really relates to a lot of these, like, are you significant enough to improve somebody's life? Are you significant enough to contribute to somebody's life, as opposed to weighing them down? So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the universal experiences at the very, very end of life, of the dying brain and the dying experiences in general. As many of you know, as a kid, I almost drowned, right? When I was about 10 years old, nobody was watching me in a pool, and I almost drowned. And it was so strange. I saw my life flash before my eyes, Ninja Turtles and all that other stuff. And I also remember this light too, and warmness. It was so strange. And this is not just me, but a universal experience of these end of life experiences or near-death experiences. So here's a clip from my friend Sharon Stone.
So tell us, I'd read that you had one of those near-death experiences. Is that true?
It is.
It is true.
It is true.
Tell me.
Well, I had that whole white light thing.
You did? At what point?
After the MRI, I was unconscious in the tube, and then when I came out of it and they talked to me, and then I kind of had that thing where it's sort of like passing out, except you pass kind of up.
You pass up.
Sort of, and you have this big blow up thing, and I don't know how to.
I don't know. I never had it, so I don't know. I'm waiting for you to.
Anybody here have it? I don't know. Yeah.
So
it's been a while now, so it's it's not as fresh for me. But it's just a lot of white light, and you see people that have passed on, and they talk to you, and then you pop right back into your body, and you're awake, and you have I had an incredible sense of well-being, in a sense that it's just so near. It's not a far away or scary thing. And that
you mean death?
Death.
Really?
That it's a very near and
like
safe.
it's a breath away.
Yes, it's just right there.
Really?
And that it's
That's interesting. I've
safe
never heard it described that way.
And loving and gentle.
Really?
And okay. And
Really?
there's nothing to be afraid of. And that it's a beautiful, loving, gentle, good. I felt so safe and so okay that all the stuff that I was terrorized when the doctor was standing there with his hand on my head, giving me that horrible look, like,
you're a goner.
Poor you.
Yeah.
You're bleeding into your head, and
okay,
that gentle, like nobody's rushing around going, okay, let's get the like they do on TV.
Yeah.
Get the stuff.
Yeah.
We're gonna get the.
There's none of that ER stuff going
Slam
on.
it on her stuff. They're just standing there going,
that's
poor
bad.
you.
That's
Yeah.
bad.
And you're going, why aren't you
getting the stuff?
Yeah. And you're like, oh, I'm a dead woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it felt okay, and I felt peaceful and serene, and like either thing would work out. But yet I really was sure that I wanted to live and be with my son. So I think it was a real choice for me.
Thanks, Sharon, for sharing, and I'll call you later, Oprah, to debrief about it. So you heard her say, like, these universal experiences, this white light and this white light, and along with these feelings of like bliss, contentment, it's like the calmness. That's the strange part. And this is universally seen and told throughout different cultures and societies, and throughout time, this has been told. So there is a psychological and scientific neuroscience explanation for this. Specifically, there's a lot of research on these near-death experiences and the commonalities with it, especially as people go under the knife through surgeries and have these outer bodies experiences. Here's a little clip about the brain. It's really about the brain and how we experience the end of life and the brain going a little haywire.
Those near-death experiences have been described by people across the world who came or thought they were coming within an inch of their life. What's totally crazy is that no matter who you are, where you come from, everyone describes it very similarly. It starts with a warmth spreading throughout the body, absolute serenity and calm. Some might even call it nirvana. Then comes a bright light and a feeling of being detached from the body as if you were floating. The number of people who have near-death experiences is on the rise thanks to technologies that can save people at the last moment. Naturally, there's a burning question here. What does it all mean? This is a complicated and emotionally charged question. For some, the near-death experience is proof of the afterlife. For others, it's a fascinating neurological question. So let's take a look at this phenomenon through a scientific lens. One of the most highly regarded studies on NDEs comes from the University of Kentucky. They found that some near-death experiences may actually be something called REM intrusion. During REM intrusion, the mind awakes before the body, which can trigger hallucinations. It's sort of like dreaming while you're awake, kind of. I covered this phenomenon in my video about sleep paralysis, so if you're interested, you should definitely check that out because it's some freaky stuff. Because REM intrusion happens in the brainstem, it's possible for this to occur even when higher functioning parts of the brain have already gone dead. Building on this research, trauma to the brain can result in a sensory mix-up. As your brain struggles to stay alive, all of that chaos results in an information overload in the visual cortex. This is known to produce visions of a bright light or a dark tunnel. The brain also releases a flood of happy endorphins, which puts you in a profound state of peace and calm. And because your brain's responsible for orienting your body relative to everything around you, trauma and oxygen deprivation can cause a sort of out-of-body experience. This has been observed in lots of people who aren't having a near-death experience as well. Lastly, a new study has been published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences on NDEs. The study was done on rats and found that after cardiac arrest, there's this crazy spike in neural activity. The lead author says that, if anything, the brain is much more active during the dying process than even the waking state. So essentially, the neurons go into overdrive as death sets in, causing the brain to go haywire in a predictable way. Cue warmth, bright light, floating, etc. We perceive this experience with profound intensity as our brain takes a sort of last hurrah before death. So I can't decide if this is beautiful or terrifying or depressing or what.
Thanks, Lacey, for highlighting all of that and summarizing all those findings that you see. And I will link up in the Canvas some of these articles about the systematic study of this end-of-life experience. So let me know what you guys think about the dying brain. Have you ever had a near-death experience? And did you know any of this stuff about the universalness of why we see a bright light, why we feel this bliss, and why we see our life flash before our eyes, right? This haywiring of the brain. So let me know. I'm going to put a discussion question there. One thing to consider in later life and throughout the life course is depression, and we know depression is this state, right, of despair, psychological anguish, and this is affecting about 1 in 5 people, according to NAMI, if not more, right? And depression is really underreported, especially in minority populations. But depression usually alleviates itself because they're bouts, right? These are bouts of depression and usually alleviates itself. It goes faster with psychotherapy or some type of pharmaceutical intervention. So that's the big issue. When is it just a bout of depression, which is more of a state, and when do we let people chronically who are depressed allow them to end their life? We know that about half the people who commit suicide and are successful, right, they do express some type of mental disorder, right, and with depression being one of the major ones. And it's a really blurry line because there's common predictors, of whether somebody becomes depressed or suicidal. First one being this intolerance of this psychological pain and frustration of it, that you keep feeling that, a feeling of hopelessness and also helplessness, right? You can't do anything about just you feeling so sad, and this communicating the intent to kill yourself. There's always this hand reaching out. There's this is both in depression and in suicide, so it's hard to tell the difference sometimes. So one thing to really watch out for, and we'll have people come in at the later part of the semester with the Blues Project to kind of really highlight what are the warning signs to watch out for, because you might see that somebody, they're all of a sudden they're rebounding, right, through their depressive bouts. But that's when we see a lot of the suicide, right? When people are recovering and we start to become baffled. You're like, well, why did that person kill himself? We thought they were getting better. So this upswing, and we'll get a little bit more into that during the semester and with the Blues projects coming in. So this just creates this larger debate. When does something is just a state, a funk that somebody's in, and then we allow them to end their life, and it could get better, but they just don't see that because they're such in a state of despair, compared to when do we just let somebody who's continually suffering, allow them to end their life? There's no right or wrong. There's this tug of war between that. When do we grant people their wishes to end their life, and when is it just a state? And then we know that there's recovery down the road. So this is a really tough issue, just that we have to deal with mental illness in general. And physicians have to really deal with this tug of war, like we were just talking about. You know, when a patient requests to kill themselves or have the means to engage in suicide, how do we know? You know, what are the commonalities, the signs, the signals of that? One of the big ones, this motivation, is this illness, right? The illness itself really weakens the person. You know, their hedonic, their everyday experience really is terrible. You know, this always feeling weak and tired and not being able to meet your autonomous needs, you know, because you're so weak and tired, you're losing that functioning. So that functioning, you're not able to meet these basic needs of autonomy and being independent. The second one would be this threat to self. You know, because you request to engage in a suicide because you have lost the ability to be who you are. You know, you could live this rich life, but then you're just battling, let's just say, a chronic disease, you know, that are in and out of treatment, and your last parts of life starts to be defined by this treatment. You know, you lose your identity, right? So rather than continue losing your identity and this sense of autonomy, you just want to be able to end your life quickly, as opposed to it being such a drawn out process. So this loss of identity and self. And lastly is this fear of the future. And you're worried about, you like your life now, or you worry about being a burden, like we saw we discussed previously, but also to your own life. You know, you don't see that as being something significant. You know, living in a potential a state where you can't make your own decisions, and being a burden to others. So this is that big portion of that significance. You know, this is when people ask themselves, how do I want to live the rest of my life? You know, what is value to me? And I don't want to see a future that has this, you know, my loss of significance. These are the three commonalities that physicians see and really have to make that judgment. You know, is it just a state, or is it something chronic? Suffering. It's not easy, obviously. It's such a difficult situation, you know, determining and do you grant somebody's request to engage in suicide? Do you give them the means to do it if they're suffering and feeling all these things? There's no right or wrong answer. It's just a judgment call, you know, because like we talked about before, everybody has different values. You know, the patient does, the doctor does. And the policies of the state, right, where you live in, or the country you live in, they have all these different policies. So these govern these decisions, you know, about being able to end your life or not. For the last activity, I want you to be able to just describe your last day. What your ideal last day be? You know, what are the psychological surroundings? Who's around you or who's not around you? Maybe you want to do it alone. And how do you not want to die, right? What are these conditions, right? If something happens to you and you can't speak, what would you like? You know, what would you want that experience to be like? Discussions we have about the dying process are so important, because that allows us, you know, to communicate through our words and our writing and have a dialogue with our loved ones of our wishes, or the wishes that they have for us. And there are components of the good death, right? And I'll link some of these articles in Canvas. But pain and symptom management, this is one of them. You know, being able to avoid suffering, you know, and ease that. This is when we start to see the shift, right? From people go from treatment to hospice or palliative care, right? Hospice or palliative care. So let's just say this, we see this a lot in cancers, right? You could either continue treatment that focuses on a cure, or we resign, and normally we say, okay, because it's very unlikely that there's going to be a cure or some type of recovery, that we just focus on quality of life. And this is part of that good death. You know, if we focus on this quality of life to end somebody's suffering or ease somebody's suffering, this is why I really highlight the importance of decision making and doing it early when somebody's still cognitively there, when somebody's still not overcome with a diagnosis in terms of like, oh, there's all these treatments and things going on that blur the lines of what they really want to do. And this preparation as well, right? Preparing not just the patient, but also the families and friends as well, right? That you guys are being on the same page, but it really has to deal with the preparation part. And this meaningfulness, this completion, right? That this part of the ego integrity, right? Seeing that their whole life is complete and it has meaning in that sense, right? This is part of the good death, right? Being able to be that going as content. You know, there's not one last thing I want to be doing. And making sure you are contributing to feeling that they have contributed to others, right? This is that generative part of this, of leaving a life legacy and that made a positive impact in somebody's life, as opposed to a burden, right? Being a burden on somebody's life. And one of these big things is that's affirmation, right? That this is the actual person that is dying, you know, and treating them individually, like this is what we call person-centered care. Actually treating the person and their life and their systems of their social circles as a whole, you know, really caring about this person as opposed to being a number. And involving the whole family system. It's not just about this one person potentially, because we know that other people matter. It's about involving the people that they care about, such as their friends, families, and them being there, and then going peacefully with people there, knowing that those people are there for them. So these are components of what we would call the good death. Wow. Right, that is one of the most intense things that we have to talk about during the aging process, because it's such an uncomfortable and uncertain, and there's uncomfortable and with so many uncertain circumstances and factors that come into play of the death and dying process, especially as we draw out the dying process with these modern advents in medicine, you know, and these technologies that keep people, quote unquote, alive. This really prolongs the question of like, what is life and what is death? You know, this really highlights that question, you know, what is the meaning of life and how do we live a good death, right? They are very interrelated with each other. And especially we have all this modern medicine and technologies and machines keeping us alive. This becomes even more and more of an issue, especially as so many older adults enter older ages. So because there's so many people entering into older ages, you are more likely to have somebody that has to deal with these dilemmas, or you personally have to make these decisions and choices with your loved ones or by yourself. You know, these are real dilemmas, that there's no right or wrong on these issues. It's really about what you value or what the dying person values. However, because we all value so many different things and it varies, there are so many issues, you know, involving when does one just want to end their life, and because they are depressed or it's their state they're in, or when is it something chronic and they can't, this would be suffering if we continue letting them live. So these issues on end of life will always be there because people value so many different things, and as we've seen in the Terri Schiavo case as well. And this is why I highlight the importance of these advance directives. You know, these advance directives, when people are cohesive and able to express their wishes, they do it in a document. And this document really is binding in the sense of, this is what my wishes are. There's no, oh, I told you this, or I heard this, I heard that. This is them in writing, this legal document. So advance directives are so important, especially earlier in life, to identify. These are really contextually dependent, right? Nobody could, because death is so uncertain, right? Nobody knows how they're gonna die, and it's likely, right, 2/3 likely that it's going to be due to some chronic disease that you're gonna die. That it's hard to it's hard to grasp, essentially, all the different circumstances when somebody's gonna die or not die. As we saw in the Brittany Maynard case, right? She was very young and nobody knew, and she didn't even know that she has such late stages of cancer in the brain, but she had to deal with those issues that revolved around death and dying. And this is such an individual case, you know, this is such an individual, like we highlight a lot of the intra-personal experiences as well, along with the societal systems. And a lot of these are based about emotions, and these emotions are not just your own emotions, that they're tied up around everybody else's. You know, somebody such as your parents that we talked about in class might feel different than your spouse that for pulling the plug, just like in the Terri Schiavo case. So there's no right or wrong, but these conflicting interests really come into play beyond the person. But for the person, right, we know that it's these absence of getting over these ego despairs, right, and developing this life meaning is one of those big keys. You know, this is why we highlighted a whole week on the meaning of life, right? Because what is meaningful to you, what is significant to you, really drives how you want to die. You know, what is actually life and what is worth living. And the big issue about the death and dying is that there's no one way, there's no one right way, there's no one wrong way. There's just so many ways to get at that final destination. But we know that there's science behind why, right? The commonalities of why, what makes a good death, right? This comfort of being around others and being cohesive when doing that. One of my favorite quotes, right, just to really highlight this, by Irvin Yalom is, death and life are interdependent. Through physical death that destroys us, but the idea of death psychologically saves us. And I really, that always has hit home to me about how connected life and death are, and what makes a good life is what makes a good death as well. Thank you all for engaging in this heavy experience of death and dying. And like always, I will see you next time.